All right, I've had some requests for this story, so I'm going to read Under the Sea. Some of you guys have already read a couple chapters. Chapter 1, The Dive. Yusuf stepped closer to the edge of the purling boat. No! Cried Nakuda. Go now! Yusuf's feet crashed into the water. It was warm. This wasn't a surprise. It was July, and the air temperature in the Arabian Gulf was 115 degrees. He slipped through the waves and began to sink quickly, 25 feet, 50 feet. Then he looked around. His eyes blinked to get used to being open underwater. It was quiet. It is almost as quiet and peaceful as the desert, he thought. Like most Bedouins, Yusuf grew up in the desert. He had never been in the water until a few weeks ago. He was here now because his sister Dalida had gotten sick and his family needed money to pay the medical bill. They had talked about selling their camel, but a Bedouin family without a camel was like a boat without a sail. They needed their camel to move from place to place in the desert. They would have a difficult time surviving without their camel. When Yusuf decided to help his family by diving for pearls, his mother was afraid. She said that many divers never came up from the bottom of the sea. Yusuf tried not to think about that now. There were four other divers nearby. Yusuf glanced around as they sank down, down, down. They floated past dark and frightening shadows. Each shadow seemed like it could be a shark waiting for them. Last week Yusuf had seen sharks in the water. The sharks' gray fins looked like knives cutting through the sea. Yusuf warned everyone of the shark, and the men on the dhow played their drums to scare them away. But Yusuf did not have a drum with him now. If a shark saw him, he wouldn't be able to scare it away like that. So the men on the top of the boat, if they see sharks, they play drums and make noises to scare the shark away. But they don't have any drums to scare them away when they're underwater. Yusuf and the other divers sank deeper toward the reef where the oysters grew. Only a few of the oysters would have pearls inside. Once in a while, a diver would risk his life for a cluster of oysters, and there would not even be one pearl inside them. Yusuf was sure that he would have a good luck today. His family was counting on him. Chapter 2, The Bottom of the Sea. Little clouds of sand drifted along the seafloor. Yusuf watched a school of tiny, bright, orange-striped fish swim past him. He felt peaceful and calm. The seafloor was covered with oysters. Yusuf would have to be careful when he collected them. The oyster shells were like very sharp knife blades. Some divers even wore little pieces of leather to protect their fingers as they grabbed and dug out the oysters. Yusuf swam closer to the reef. He quickly found a bed of oysters. He grabbed one of the oysters and pulled it away from the reef. Success! Yusuf grabbed the oyster before it sank. Then he shoved it into the basket that hung around his neck. He jabbed at the cluster to get the second one. It did not move. He pushed harder. Finally, it gave way. He stuffed it into his basket. It took Yusuf almost a minute to collect 6 oysters. He began to feel a tight push in his chest. It felt like heavy rocks were sitting on him. He guessed that he had had 45 seconds of breath left in his lungs. Then he would tug on the rope, and the rope tenders would pull him to safety to the surface. Yusuf looked around for another bed of oysters. One of the other divers farther down the reef waved his arms. "What's wrong?" thought Yusuf. Then he saw dark shadows pass overhead. Sharks, just yards away from them. There were 5, maybe 6 sharks. Huge, gray, frightening sharks. Yusuf tightened his hand around his lifeline, but he did not see the other divers pulling on theirs. There must be a reason why they aren't signaling for help. Maybe the sharks would grab them on the way up. The sharks waved their massive bodies from side to side in the water. Each one was as large as 2 or 3 divers. Yusuf's heart pounded. He would not stand a chance if they were hungry. If they are hungry, Yusuf thought, Of course they're hungry, and we are a perfect meal for them. Chapter 3, The Solution. Oh, we've got a problem, we've got a solution, even calls it the solution. What should I do? Yusuf thought. Whenever he faced challenges back home in the desert, Grandfather would say, face your problems head on. Don't run away. He had faced many problems head on. That was part of everyday life for Bedouins. He had learned to stay safe in shamals, sandstorms fierce enough to destroy a whole village. He had learned to find water in the middle of the desert. But how would a Bedouin know what to do in the ocean surrounded by sharks? The divers were trapped, and Yusuf was running out of air. He had to think fast. Whoa, huge. Yusuf thought about how sad his family would be if anything happened to him. He missed his family and he missed his old camel, Maluf. As a child, Grandma had taught him to take care of Maluf. Sometimes Maluf would become upset about something and would spit at Yusuf. Yusuf learned to look directly in the camel's eyes and gently rub his nose until he was calm. One of the sharks approached Yusuf. He knew he had to do something. He quickly turned around to face the shark and held out his right hand. The shark came closer. Yusuf looked into its wild gray eyes. Then he gently touched the shark's nose. The other divers watched in horror. The shark shook its head from side to side. It looked at Yusuf. Then, to the amazement of the other divers, the shark relaxed. Yusuf carefully stroked the shark's nose, the same way he used to stroke Maluf's nose. The shark became calm and almost limp. After a moment, the other shark swam away. The other divers pulled on their ropes and began to rise through the water. Yusuf slowly pulled his hand away from the shark and tugged on his rope. The air rushed out of his lungs, and he was jerked up. Chapter 4, The 6 Oysters. Yusuf struggled to breathe on the floor of the dhow. He did not know how he got there. He remembered being underwater and how he was choking and gasping under the bright sun. Yusuf's rope tender, the old man, turned him on his side, slapped Yusuf's back a few times. Yusuf coughed the water out of his lungs. Then Yusuf heard the other divers shouting. The Bedouin boys saved us, they said. What happened? Nakuda asked Nakuda. A shark came at me and he made a shark came at him and he made it go to sleep. It was unbelievable. The shark just went still and the other sharks swam away. Yusuf sat up exhausted. He could hear the others talking about him. He looked up at Nakuda. The Nakuda grunted. He gestured at the divers and they all emptied their baskets onto the pile of oysters on the deck. Yusuf carefully placed his 6 oysters on the top of the pile. Look at all these oysters. The Nakuda walked towards Yusuf. Yusuf drew back. He knew he hadn't caught as many oysters as some of the other divers. He was afraid the Nakuda would yell at him. The Nakuda pointed at Yusuf's oysters. Take them back, he said. I don't understand, Yusuf said. He was confused. Had he done something wrong? The Nakuda took Yusuf's oysters from the pile and held them out to say, You saved the lives of our men today. We thank you by giving you these. Whatever you find inside them, you may keep for yourself. The other divers gasped when they heard this. So maybe after diving, they have to give all of their oysters away? They don't get to keep any of them? But he gets to keep them because he saved everybody. What do you think's going to be in the middle? Probably something good. Thank you, said Yusuf. You are very kind. He took the oysters from Nakuda. Now, said Nakuda, put those away and drink some coffee. We dive again in 5 minutes. Yusuf nodded. He took the rest of his oysters from the pile and put them back in his basket. He would have to think of a safe place for them. There they are. He thought of Grandfather somewhere in the middle of the desert. Grandfather had heard his cry from 50 feet under the sea. The other divers brought Yusuf some sweet dates and coffee. They would be back in the water again soon, once the Nakuda found another reef. But for now, Yusuf was happy to sit and rest and tell the story of how grandfather had helped him escape the sharks. The end. So they never really show us what's in the back or inside. Wow. Cool. Hope you enjoyed it.